Good morning, boys and girls. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. The library, a magic castle. Come to the magic castle when you are growing tall. Rows upon rows of word windows line every single wall. They reach up high as the sky, and you want to open them all. For every time you open one, a new adventure has begun. The library, a magic castle. Boys and girls, the story I've chosen for this morning is one of my very favorites. It's entitled, Mr. Bear, Squash You All Flat. Once in a certain part of the forest, there lived a very large and very stupid bear. His name was Mr. Bear, Squash You All Flat. And this is why. He liked to squash things. He liked to sit on things and squash them flat. He especially liked to squash the houses of other animals because he was too stupid to build a house for himself and had to live out of doors all the time. Now, it is easy to see why this bad habit made him the neighborhood nuisance and why his name was Mr. Bear, Squash You All Flat. For many days, Mr. Bear, Squash You All Flat would live quietly and peacefully, sleeping under the trees and eating his favorite berries. And then there would be a night when the moon was full, and the next morning, Mr. Bear, Squash You All Flat would roam over the neighborhood, squashing every house that he saw. It was lucky for him that he had never tried to squash a beehive, but you know what finally happened to him was almost as bad as you will find out. It all began on one of his squashing days, after a bright full moon had kept him awake the whole night long. Oh, he was so cross that he ran loppity-lop through the woods until he came right up to the house of a little gray mouse. "Hello in there," he roared. "I am Mr. Bear, Squash You All Flat, and I give you fair warning. I am going to count to 3, and then I'm going to squash you flat." And boys and girls, he did. Then, feeling a little better, he shuffled off looking for something else to squash. The little gray mouse, who had run out of harm's way while Mr. Bear was giving fair warning, looked sad at all that was left of his house. "Oh, well," he said, "no use crying over a squashed house," and he started out to find another place to live. Meanwhile, Mr. Bear had come to the home of a chipmunk. "I am Mr. Bear, Squash You All Flat," he roared, "and I give you fair warning. I am going to count to 3, and then I'm going to squash you flat." And he did. Now he felt much better, and he shuffled off looking for something else to squash. The chipmunk had heard Mr. Bear coming and had hidden behind a bush. He gave one low little groan when he saw what had happened to his house, and then he ran away through the woods looking for another place to live. By now, Mr. Bear had come to another house. It was the home of a baby rabbit who had lost his parents during the last snowstorm of the winter, and he lived all alone. But nothing could stop that stupid Mr. Bear. Oh no, he roared out, "I am Mr. Bear, Squash You All Flat, and I give you fair warning. I am going to count to 3, and then I'm going to squash you flat." And he counted to 3, and then he squashed flat that house too. "There, that's enough work for one day," he said to himself, and feeling quite cheerful now, he lumbered off, loppity-lop, to find a shady place where he could catch up on his sleep. The little mouse was looking everywhere for a new home. He went down a path and across a meadow and under a gate, and there, right by a brook, and in the shade of an oak tree, there lay an old tire. Now, this wasn't not just an ordinary automobile tire. It was a great big super bus tire. Well, what a perfectly splendid house, the little mouse said when he saw the tire. I wonder if it's taken. He knocked on the tire and called out, little house, who lives here? Not a sound. The mouse looked inside. Well, nobody. Well, then I will. And he moved in that very day. The next day, the chipmunk came scampering along. He stopped when he saw the tire. Aha, he said to himself, one of those modern houses, and running water too. And he called out, little house, who lives here? Nobody but me, answered the mouse, looking out of a window he had just made to catch the morning sun. Are you looking for a place to live? Oh, yes, indeed I am, said the chipmunk, giving one great bounce to show how he really meant it. Well, come inside then, and let's live together. And the chipmunk moved right in. Now, the next morning, along came the baby rabbit. He had been lost twice and was beginning to think he'd never be able to settle down again when he saw the old tire. Right away he called out, little house, who lives here? Oh, we do, said the chipmunk and the mouse, looking out at him. Come and live with us if you want to. There's plenty of room for one more. And so the baby rabbit moved right in. This made the tire quite full, so the mouse hung out a no vacancy sign, and the three of them lived happily together for some time. Then one night the moon was full and bright, and early the next morning, loppity-lop, down the path, across the meadow, and over the gate came that neighborhood nuisance, that large and stupid Mr. Bear Squashu All Flat. And he was as cross as he could be. The baby rabbit, out getting his breakfast, saw him coming and ran back to warn the mouse and the chipmunk. They all three hid behind the oak tree and trembled and just hoped that Mr. Bear would pass by without seeing their house. But he didn't pass by. He stopped at the brook to get a drink of water, and then he saw the old tire. Well, he said, I think I'm going to feel better. And he went right up to the tire and roared out, hello in there, it is I, Mr. Bear Squashu All Flat, and I'm going to squash you flat. Now, just like that, without even counting to three, the baby rabbit hid his eyes. The chipmunk and the mouse sighed, and Mr. Bear sat down right on their house plump. But nothing happened. That is, nothing happened except Mr. Bear bounced, a gentle little bounce, into the air, and the tire was the same as ever. Now Mr. Bear stood up and looked at the tire. There it was, the same as ever, and not the least bit squashed. Mr. Bear could not believe his eyes. Neither could the three little animals hiding behind the oak tree. Perhaps it's because I didn't give fair warning and to count to three, he mumbled. Oh, he was such a stupid bear. So he called out, I am Mr. Bear Squashu All Flat, and I give you fair warning. I'm going to count to three, and then I'm going to squash you flat. And then he walked a little way off and came running loppity-lop and landed plop on the old rubber tire. And he bounced again, and this time he bounced higher, and there was the tire, the same as ever. Now, Mr. Bear did not say a word. Oh, he was very, very angry. He walked way off, and then he took a deep breath. The mouse whispered, this is it, fellas, as Mr. Bear started running faster and faster and faster. Lippity-lop, lippity-lop, lippity-lop. And he landed on top of the tire with a great thud. He bounced so high that he banged his stupid head quite hard against the lowest branch of the oak tree and came down with an awful plop on the solid ground. And there was the tire, the same as ever. Now, this was quite a shock to Mr. Bear Squash You All Flat. He shook himself once and felt to see if there were any broken bones. There weren't. And then he ran off as fast as he could, which wasn't very fast this time. Now, you know he never came back to that neighborhood. No matter how bright the moon shone, he never squashed anything anymore. Never again. And as for the mouse, the chipmunk, and the baby rabbit, well, they were so happy that they had to do something. So you know they invited all their neighbors to a great big party. And that, boys and girls, is the story of Mr. Bear Squash You All Flat. And now, boys and girls, stay tuned, and I'm going to come back and read you from our big Do You Know book. Stay tuned. And now I'm going to read from our big Do You Know book. Do you know that 2 of our presidents were born in February? Do you know Abraham Lincoln was born on February the 12th, 1809? Do you know that Lincoln was the commander-in-chief during the Civil War, which preserved the United States and let it become one nation? Do you know later Abraham Lincoln became the 16th President of the United States? Do you know President Lincoln was the first president to have a beard while in office? Do you know he was always called Honest Abe? Now, do you know that George Washington was born on February the 22nd, 1732? Do you know George Washington was Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War in 1775 through 1783? He became our first president and served 2 terms, and he is known as the father of our country. Do you know the story about how George, as a small boy, tried out his new hatchet and chopped down his father's favorite tree, a cherry tree? And when his father asked him about the cherry tree, and George immediately confessed and said, "I cannot tell a lie. I did cut down your cherry tree." And you know his father was thankful he was able to tell the truth, and he thanked his son for not telling a lie. And so, boys and girls, now in February, about George Washington's birthday, we celebrate always by having a slice of cherry pie. And boys and girls, that is our Do You Know for this morning, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, get very comfortable and listen to the story, The Tawny, Scrawny Lion. Once there was a tawny, scrawny, hungry lion who never could get enough to eat. He chased monkeys on Monday, kangaroos on Tuesday, zebras on Wednesday, bears on Thursday, camels on Friday, and Saturday, elephants. And since he caught everything he ran after, that lion should have been as fat as butter. But he wasn't at all. The more he ate, the scrawnier and hungrier he grew. Oh, the other animals didn't feel safe one bit. They stood at a distance and tried to talk things over with the tawny, scrawny lion. "It's all your fault for running away," he grumbled. "If I didn't have to run for every single bite, I'd be fat as butter and sleek as satin. Then I wouldn't have to eat so much, and you'd last longer." Just then a fat little rabbit came hopping through the forest, picking berries. All the big animals looked at him and grinned slyly. "Rabbit," they said, "oh, you lucky rabbit, we appoint you to talk things over with the lion." Now that made the little rabbit feel very proud. "Well, now what shall I talk about?" he asked eagerly. "Any old thing," said the big animals. "The important thing is to go right up close." So the fat little rabbit hopped right up to the big hungry lion and counted his ribs. "Oh, you look much too scrawny to talk things over," he said. "So how about supper at my house first?" "Well, now what's for supper?" asked the lion. The little rabbit said, "Carrot stew." Oh, that sounded awful to the lion. But the little rabbit said, "Yes, sir, my 5 fat sisters and my 4 fat brothers are making a delicious big carrot stew right now." "Well, what are we waiting for?" cried the lion, and he went hopping away with the little rabbit, thinking of 10 fat rabbits and looking just as jolly as you please. "Well," grinned all the big animals, that should take care of Tawny Scrawny for today." Now before very long the lion began to wonder if they would ever get to the rabbit's house. First the fat little rabbit kept stopping to pick berries and mushrooms, and then all sorts of good-smelling herbs. And when his basket was full, what did he do but flop down on the river bank? "Wait a minute," he said, "I want to catch a few fish for the stew." That was almost too much for the hungry lion, but for a moment he thought he would have to eat that one little rabbit then and there. But then he kept saying, 5 fat sisters and 4 fat brothers over and over to himself, and at last the 2 were on their way again. "Here we are," said the rabbit, hopping around a turn with the lion close behind him. Sure enough, there was the rabbit's house, with a big pot of stew bubbling over an open fire. And sure enough, there were 9 more fat, merry little rabbits hopping around it. When they saw the fish, they popped them into the stew, along with the mushrooms and the herbs, and the stew began to smell very good indeed. And when they saw the tawny, scrawny lion, they gave him a big bowl of hot stew. And then they hopped about so busily that really it would have been quite a job for that tired, hungry lion to catch even one of them. So he gobbled up his stew, but the rabbits filled his bowl again. And when he'd eaten all he could hold, they heaped his bowl with berries. And when the berries were gone, the tawny, scrawny lion wasn't scrawny anymore. Oh, he felt so good and fat and comfortable that he couldn't even move. "Here's a fine thing," he said to himself, "all these fat little rabbits, and I haven't room inside for even one." He looked at all those fine, fat little rabbits and wished he'd get hungry again. "Mind if I stay a while?" he asked. "Oh, we wouldn't hear of you going," said the rabbits. Then they plumped themselves down in the lion's lap and began to sing songs. And somehow, even when it was time to say goodnight, that lion wasn't one bit hungry. Home he went through the soft moonlight, singing softly to himself. He curled up in his bed, patted his sleek fat tummy, and smiled. When he woke up in the morning, it was Monday. "Time to chase monkeys," said the lion. But you know, he wasn't one bit hungry for monkeys. What he wanted was some more of that tasty carrot stew. So off he went to visit the rabbits. On Tuesday, he didn't want kangaroos. And on Wednesday, he didn't want zebras. He wasn't hungry for bears on Thursday, or camels on Friday, or even elephants on Saturday. All the big animals were so surprised and so happy. They all dressed in their best and went to see the fat little rabbit. "Rabbit," they said, "oh, you wonderful rabbit, what in the world did you talk to the tawny, scrawny, hungry, terrible lion about?" The fat little rabbit jumped up in the air and said, "Oh my goodness, oh, we had such a good time with that nice jolly lion that I guess we forgot to talk about anything at all." And before the big animals could say one word, the tawny lion came skipping up the path. He had a basket of berries for the fat rabbit sisters, and a string of fish for the fat rabbit brothers, and a big bunch of daisies for the fat rabbit himself. "I came for supper," he said, shaking paws all around. Then he sat down in the soft grass, looking fat as butter, sleek as satin, and jolly as all get out, all ready for another good supper of carrot stew. And that, boys and girls, is the story of the tawny, scrawny lion. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, be sure and visit your public library sometime during this next week. Visit any of the libraries in the Craven, Pamlico, Carteret Regional Library System. And boys and girls, be sure and check out some very good books on your very own library card. And now I'd like to read you this poem from this great big book, The Golden Book of 365 Stories, a story for every day of the year. And this is the story I want to read, the poem that I want to read to you about George Washington. Hip, hip, hooray. When I grow up, I'll be president. I'll be pretty sure of that. And I'll ride a horse like George Washington. I'll wear a tricorn hat. I won't make speeches like presidents now. I'll just make a proclamation that every year when my birthday comes, all over the whole wide nation, there'll be parades with fifes and drums and flags that toss and fly. But instead of cherry, we'll all make merry with our very favorite kind of pie. And that is the poem, Hip, Hip, Hooray. And boys and girls, let me remind you to start this year out by having a bedtime story every night with your parents, having a good time reading anything that you would like to read, and read to them if you will. Read some very, very good stories. And you know, boys and girls, that family time will always be rewarding to you in many years to come, because you develop a habit, a very good habit, of reading every night at bedtime. And you know, if you read and read a story that you want to read every day, if you read 20 minutes every day, by the end of a month you will have read several different books, and you've chosen just what you want to read. And that is a blessing. And two, share your book friends with many of your friends, because your book friends will be your friends all your life, like you have made your good friends. And boys and girls, let me remind you, visit your public library, where we have wonderful programs every week for you. And to any of the libraries in the Craven, Pamlico, Carteret Regional Library System. The librarians are looking forward to you being their guest every week. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read to your bunny. Reading together 20 minutes a day is the most important gift you can give your child. Read to your bunny often. It's 20 minutes of fun. It's 20 minutes of moonlight and oh so much fun. And that, boys and girls, is Read to Your Bunny. Until next week, this is Eleanor Hawkins saying bye-bye for Telestory time.